There's a war happening right now. Not in the streets, not on battlefields, but in the depths of human consciousness. It's a war between light and shadow, between those who dare to think and those who secretly despise them for it. Picture this. A brilliant mind emerges from the crowd. They speak truths others cannot bear to hear. They see patterns others refuse to acknowledge. They carry a light so bright, it illuminates the darkness in everyone around them. What happens next? You'd expect admiration, respect, gratitude. Instead, you get something far more sinister. Socrates, the father of critical thinking, was forced to drink poison by his own people. His crime? Making them question their beliefs. Galileo, who revealed the cosmos' true nature, was condemned by those who preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. In our modern age, whistleblowers who expose corruption are branded as traitors. Visionaries who challenge the status quo are cancelled, silenced, and destroyed. This isn't a coincidence. It's a pattern as old as humanity itself. The same people who secretly admire strength will orchestrate its destruction. The minds that inspire awe also inspire a deeper, more primal emotion: resentment. Not the obvious kind, the subtle, unconscious hatred that festers in the shadows of the psyche. Carl Jung understood this paradox better than anyone. He knew that when you shine too brightly, you don't just illuminate the path forward. You expose what others have spent their lives hiding from themselves, their inadequacies, their fears, their comfortable delusions. The light becomes a mirror, and most people would rather shatter the mirror than face what it reflects. Tonight, we explore why humanity's greatest minds have always been its most resented outcasts, why strength attracts not just admiration, but secret hostility, why the very people who could save us are the ones we're programmed to destroy. This is the hidden war of minds. And if you've ever felt the sting of inexplicable resentment for simply being who you are, you're already a casualty in this ancient battle. The question isn't whether this war exists. The question is, which side are you on? To understand this war, we must first understand the battlefield, the human psyche itself. Carl Jung mapped this territory better than anyone before or since. He discovered that every human being carries two fundamental forces within them: the light of consciousness and the darkness of the shadow. The light represents everything we admire: awareness, authenticity, courage, and individuality. It's the part of us that seeks truth, embraces growth, and refuses to live in comfortable lies. Strong minds embody this light. They've done the painful work of becoming conscious, of facing reality without flinching. But here's where it gets dangerous. The shadow represents everything we've rejected about ourselves: our fears, insecurities, weaknesses, and unacknowledged failures. Most people spend their entire lives running from their shadow, building elaborate defenses to avoid confronting what they truly are beneath their carefully constructed personas. When a strong mind enters their world, something catastrophic happens. The light they carry acts like a cosmic X-ray, illuminating not just the path forward, but the shadows others have desperately tried to hide. Suddenly, the comfortable darkness is pierced by an unforgiving brightness that reveals every crack in their foundation. Jung called this projection. Unable to bear the pain of seeing their own inadequacies reflected in another's strength, the unconscious mind performs a psychological sleight of hand. It takes those uncomfortable feelings and projects them outward, transforming self-loathing into hatred of the mirror itself. The strong mind becomes a walking reminder of everything others could have been but chose not to become. They represent the road not taken, the courage not summoned, the truth not faced. And rather than use this as inspiration for growth, the wounded ego chooses a different path: destruction of the source. This isn't conscious malice. It's an unconscious survival mechanism. The psyche protects itself by eliminating the threat to its comfortable illusions. The tragedy is that in destroying the light-bearer, humanity destroys the very illumination it desperately needs to evolve. Jung understood that this pattern wasn't personal, it was archetypal, written into the collective unconscious of our species. The eternal drama of consciousness versus shadow, playing out in every generation, in every culture, wherever strong minds dare to shine their light into the comfortable darkness of human ignorance. History reads like a graveyard of brilliant minds destroyed by the very people who should have celebrated them. The pattern is so consistent, it might as well be a law of human nature. The brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts, and the more violently that shadow strikes back. Socrates stands as the archetypal example. Here was a man who dedicated his life to awakening minds, to helping people think more clearly, to questioning the unexamined assumptions that kept society trapped in ignorance. His reward? Accusations of corrupting youth and impiety. The Athenians, who prided themselves on wisdom and democracy, forced their greatest philosopher to drink hemlock rather than continue exposing their intellectual poverty. Galileo's crime was even more revealing. He didn't just challenge religious doctrine, he challenged humanity's comfortable position at the center of the universe. By proving that Earth revolved around the sun, he shattered the ultimate ego trip, the belief that we were the focal point of creation. The Church's response wasn't just religious persecution, it was psychological self-defense on a massive scale. Nietzsche saw this pattern clearly and paid the price for his insight. He predicted his own fate. I am not a man, I am dynamite. He understood that his ideas would explode comfortable assumptions about morality, religion, and human nature. Society's response was predictable: misinterpretation, vilification, and ultimately, the sanitization of his dangerous truths into safe academic footnotes. But this isn't just ancient history. The pattern continues with mechanical precision. Consider modern whistleblowers like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange. They exposed truths that should have sparked gratitude and reform. Instead, they became international pariahs hunted by the very systems they tried to reform. Their crime wasn't treason, it was illumination. They held up mirrors to power structures that preferred operating in darkness. In corporate environments, the pattern repeats endlessly. The employee who questions unethical practices becomes the troublemaker. The innovator who challenges outdated methods becomes the disruptor who needs to be managed or eliminated. The honest voice in a room full of yes-men becomes the problem that needs solving. Even in personal relationships, we see this dynamic. The friend who grows too much makes others uncomfortable. The family member who breaks generational patterns of dysfunction becomes the difficult one. The partner who pursues authentic self-development threatens those who've settled for mediocrity. The tragedy isn't just individual, it's civilizational. Humanity's greatest leaps forward come from minds willing to challenge existing paradigms. Yet we've created systems that systematically identify and neutralize these very minds before they can fulfill their potential. We worship innovation while destroying innovators. We celebrate progress while persecuting progressives. Jung saw this as humanity's greatest shadow. Our tendency to murder our prophets and then build monuments to them once they're safely dead and their ideas have been neutered into acceptable platitudes. Resentment is perhaps the most misunderstood emotion in human psychology. We think of it as anger, but it's far more sophisticated and dangerous. Nietzsche called it resentiment, a French term that captures something English cannot: the slow-burning poison that transforms weakness into hatred, inadequacy into moral superiority, and envy into righteous indignation. Unlike simple anger, which burns hot and fast, resentment is a cold fire that can smolder for decades. It's the emotion of those who feel powerless but refuse to admit it even to themselves. Instead of facing their own limitations, they construct elaborate psychological defenses that transform their weakness into virtue and others' strength into vice. Here's how the mechanism works. When confronted with someone who embodies what they could have become, the resentful mind faces an unbearable choice. Either acknowledge their own failures and begin the painful work of growth, or find a way to make the superior person's qualities seem worthless or even evil. The second option is always more appealing because it requires no change, no growth, no confrontation with uncomfortable truths. Instead, it offers the intoxicating feeling of moral superiority without the effort of actual improvement. Watch how this plays out in everyday life. The out-of-shape person doesn't resent the athlete's discipline. They convince themselves that fitness obsession is vanity. The unsuccessful entrepreneur doesn't admire the successful one's vision, they focus on their exploitation or luck. The intellectually lazy person doesn't respect the scholar's dedication. They dismiss intelligence as elitism or overthinking. This psychological alchemy is breathtaking in its sophistication. Resentment doesn't just protect the ego from painful comparisons, it actually makes the resentful person feel superior to their superior. The weak become morally pure, the lazy become authentically human, the ignorant become righteously grounded. But resentment's most insidious feature is its collective nature. Individual resentment seeks allies, and it finds them easily among others who share similar inadequacies. Soon a mob forms around shared weakness, united not by what they stand for, but by what they stand against. This is why strong minds often face not just individual hostility, but coordinated group persecution. The resentful don't attack alone. They gather others who share their psychological wounds and create movements, campaigns or cultures dedicated to tearing down what they cannot become. In our hyper-connected age, resentment has found its perfect medium, social media. Now the resentful can instantly connect with millions of like-minded individuals, amplifying their collective shadow until it becomes a tsunami of coordinated hatred, directed at anyone who dares to shine too brightly. The most tragic part: those who carry resentment believe they're fighting for justice, equality, or moral righteousness. They never recognize that they're simply externalizing their own internal war between their actual self and their potential self. The strong mind becomes a casualty in someone else's psychological civil war. If resentment were merely an individual psychological phenomenon, it would be tragic but containable. But something far more sinister has emerged: the systematic weaponization of resentment by institutions that profit from keeping populations weak, divided and psychologically dependent. Governments, corporations, and media organizations have discovered that resentment is the most powerful tool of social control ever invented. Unlike fear, which eventually dissipates, or anger, which burns out quickly, resentment is self-sustaining. It feeds on itself, growing stronger with time, creating populations that are perpetually outraged, but never quite sure at what. The formula is elegant in its simplicity. Identify a group that embodies strength, success, or independence, then systematically demonize their qualities as forms of oppression, privilege, or social harm. This serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It neutralizes potential threats to existing power structures, it provides scapegoats for societal problems, and it creates emotional dependency on the very institutions perpetuating the manipulation. Historical examples abound. Totalitarian regimes have always targeted intellectuals first, not because they pose immediate physical threats, but because they represent the possibility of independent thought. The Khmer Rouge murdered anyone who wore glasses, assuming they could read. Stalin purged artists and scientists. Nazi Germany burned books and drove out its greatest minds. But modern manipulation is far more sophisticated. Instead of crude persecution, we see subtle character assassination. Independent thinkers are labeled conspiracy theorists, successful. Individuals become symbols of inequality. Those who question official narratives become dangerous spreaders of misinformation. The genius of this approach is that it recruits the resentful masses to do the dirty work voluntarily. No secret police needed, just weaponized envy disguised as social justice. The state doesn't need to silence dissidents when an army of resentful citizens will attack them for free on social media. Corporate power structures employ similar tactics. Companies don't eliminate innovative employees through direct firing. They create cultures where innovation is subtly discouraged, where thinking differently is coded as not being a team player, where intellectual excellence is reframed as making others feel. Bad educational systems have been perhaps the most effective laboratories for resentment cultivation. Instead of inspiring students to reach higher levels of achievement, many modern pedagogical approaches focus on ensuring no one feels inferior. Excellence is discouraged as elitist. Competition is eliminated as harmful. The result? Generations of students who've been trained to resent rather than aspire to greatness. Media amplifies these dynamics exponentially. News cycles focus obsessively on the failures of successful people, the scandals of influential figures, and the mistakes of innovators. The message is clear. Anyone who rises above the crowd is a target. The safest strategy is mediocrity. Jung warned about this exact scenario, the rise of the mass psyche where Individuals lose their capacity for independent thought and become part of a collective shadow that projects its inadequacies onto anyone who dares to individuate. What he couldn't have predicted was how efficiently modern technology would facilitate this process, creating echo chambers where resentment could metastasize without challenge. The ultimate tragedy is that this systematic cultivation of resentment doesn't just destroy strong minds, it prevents their emergence in the first place. When potential is systematically discouraged, when excellence is consistently punished, when independent thought is reliably attacked, people learn to hide their light rather than risk becoming targets. Behind every strong mind lies a profound and often crushing solitude. This isn't the comfortable loneliness of introversion or the temporary isolation of focused work. This is the existential loneliness of carrying light in a world that prefers darkness, of seeing clearly in a society that rewards blindness. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his final years in madness, his brilliant mind fractured by the weight of insights that his contemporaries couldn't comprehend. Franz Kafka died believing his works were worthless, never knowing he'd become one of literature's greatest voices. Vincent van Gogh sold exactly one painting in his lifetime, dying in poverty and obscurity, his genius recognized only after he could no longer benefit from the acknowledgement. These weren't isolated cases of misunderstood artists. They represent the inevitable psychological toll of carrying light that others find too bright to bear. The strong mind doesn't just face external persecution, they face the internal agony of watching humanity choose comfortable lies over liberating truths, again and again and again. Imagine knowing solutions to problems that surround you, but being powerless to implement them, because those who could help are too threatened by your clarity to listen. Imagine seeing patterns that predict disasters, but being dismissed as alarmist or paranoid. Imagine offering gifts of insight only to watch them be rejected, distorted or weaponized against you. This is the daily reality for many strong minds. They become like doctors in a plague-ridden city, where the patients attack them for suggesting that hygiene might prevent disease. The very people who most need their help become their fiercest enemies. The loneliness deepens because strong minds often cannot find intellectual equals. Conversation becomes a minefield where every authentic thought risks triggering resentment. They learn to hide their insights, to dumb down their observations, to pretend ignorance to avoid making others uncomfortable. But this creates a different kind of agony, the slow death of intellectual honesty, the gradual suffocation of authentic self-expression. Relationships become particularly challenging. Romantic partners may initially be attracted to the strong mind's depth and insight, but as the relationship deepens, they often become threatened by qualities they once admired. Friends drift away, unable to maintain connections with someone whose growth makes them uncomfortable with their own stagnation. Family members may become hostile, seeing the strong mind's development as an implicit judgment of their choices. The strong mind faces a cruel paradox. The more they develop their gifts, the more isolated they become. The more clearly they see, the more alone they feel. The more they try to help others, the more they're resented for their efforts. Many strong minds go through a period of trying to dim their light, to fit in, to be normal. They may suppress their insights, avoid challenging conversations, or pretend to hold popular opinions they know are wrong. But this strategy inevitably fails because authenticity isn't optional for truly strong minds. It's a psychological necessity. The alternative, embracing the loneliness, requires enormous courage. It means accepting that your path will be largely solitary, that your insights will often be unappreciated in your lifetime, that your gifts may never receive the recognition they deserve. It means finding meaning in the work itself, rather than in external validation. Yet this loneliness, paradoxically, becomes a source of strength. Stripped of the need for approval, the strong mind becomes even more independent, even more authentic, even more powerful. The isolation that was meant to break them becomes the crucible that forges them into something unbreakable. If you're watching this and feeling the recognition of this loneliness, understand this: your isolation isn't evidence of your failure, it's proof of your light. But the story doesn't end in darkness. Jung didn't map the territory of human shadow just to catalogue our failures. He sought the path to transformation. And in that path lies not just personal salvation, but the possibility of species evolution, The answer isn't to dim our light or hide our strength to avoid resentment. The answer is transcendence, rising above the cycle of shadow and projection through conscious integration of our own darkness and fearless commitment to our authentic light. Jung called this process individuation, the hero's journey of becoming who you truly are rather than who others expect you to be. But true individuation requires something most people find unbearable: facing your own shadow with the same unflinching honesty you bring to illuminating others' darkness. The strong mind must acknowledge its own capacity for resentment, its own moments of weakness, its own tendencies toward projection. Only by integrating these shadow elements can they transcend the victim-perpetrator cycle that keeps humanity trapped in endless cycles of resentment and persecution. This integration creates something remarkable: compassion without compromise. The strong mind that has faced its own darkness can understand the resentment directed at it without being destroyed by it. They can see the fear behind the hatred, the pain behind the projection, the unconscious cry for help disguised as hostility. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or dimming their light to make others comfortable. It means carrying their light with such grounded confidence that others' shadows can't extinguish it. It means being so rooted in authentic self-knowledge that external resentment becomes irrelevant to their mission. The transcendent, strong mind becomes like a lighthouse. They don't chase ships to illuminate them. They simply stand firm and let their light guide those ready to navigate toward shore. They understand that their role isn't to force consciousness on the unconscious, but to be so thoroughly conscious themselves that they become beacons for others ready to wake up. But transcendence isn't just individual, it's evolutionary. Every strong mind who refuses to be broken by resentment, who continues to carry light despite persecution, who transforms their own shadow into wisdom, contributes to humanity's collective growth. They become ancestors to future generations of strong minds who will find the path slightly easier because someone before them held the line. Jung believed that consciousness itself was evolution, that the universe was slowly waking up to itself through human awareness, and that strong minds were the growing edge of this cosmic awakening. From this perspective, the resentment directed at strong minds isn't personal. It's evolutionary resistance, the pull of entropy against the emergence of higher consciousness. The choice facing every strong mind is ultimately cosmic in scope. Will you allow humanity's unconscious resistance to dim your light, or will you burn so brightly that you help lift the species toward its next evolutionary leap? The path forward isn't comfortable. It requires accepting that you may never be understood in your lifetime, that your gifts may never receive recognition, that your insights may be rejected by the very people they could save. But it also offers something profound: the opportunity to participate in the universe's own awakening, to serve as midwife to humanity's birth into higher consciousness. Standing at this crossroads, you face the eternal choice that defines every generation: join the comfortable darkness of collective unconsciousness, or carry the lonely but luminous torch of individual awakening. The resentment will continue. The persecution will persist. The loneliness will remain, but so will the light. And in the end, light always wins, not because it destroys darkness, but because it transforms it into something greater than either could become alone. The war of minds continues. The question remains: which side will you choose?